Hello everyone, it's Minel again with another audio this time about a different subject. Um, I guess that's a subject that is kind of like very uh, I would say it sinks deep in my heart to speak about these things because I guess this is something that some concept that is like the source of a lot of suffering in the world, and I guess this is like something I really want to speak about because it was like it led to a lot of suffering in me, and I guess that since I see my personal experience of life now with the understanding and how I feel the world as a whole, I guess it has kind of changed completely my way of relating and behaving, and I'm really grateful for that. So today I'm gonna talk about um, morality, like the morality scale, and I guess we are kind of like raised to like different kind of morality scales that are confounding themselves, like they are merging from each other, and we kind of like have this vague idea of what is good or bad about some subjects, and for others it's like quite decisive in some way. And yeah, either way, this is like, I guess, for most people a major uh, catalyst into like behavior is to think, okay, am I a good person or a bad person if I do this good or bad action? And we kind of have like this tendency, I guess, to identify to the actions whether they are like good or bad, and or trying to ignore it or whatever. But it's I guess a major concern for some people to either align to the morality codes or transgress them. Um, and so I kind of want to talk about this because, yeah, I think, and today I was like, it's the 2nd of February, like another big vague of like big wave of the Epstein files just got out, and I guess it's just like putting it back, the subject of, are some humans beings inherently evil or good, or I guess do we, all of us in a certain set of circumstances, can go into some really darkly seen behaviors and become like what people would call monsters, like uh, because whenever we do that, we kind of strip off like of their humanity, the persons that actually did very heinous acts in their lives. So I guess it put me back on the loop today. I was also like very much considering the question and like reassessing my own views about this and what I feel inside me. Like I guess it's particularly strong for me and personal because I've experimented trauma as being a child. I will not like talk about this like in this video or audio precisely, but I guess this aspect of domination in human relationship is something I'm quite like it's something that I've experimented, I would say, and all the loop after that. like it was important for me to explain this, I guess, to also say, okay, this is kind of a framework that is important in my life. I guess the concept or of victim and executioner, and I might add later savior in this loop, it's something that is like very well present in our, I guess, in our mythology in some ways. Like stories about gods are like full, and the divine are full of uh, people experimenting disaster, and in some way, whether it's a disaster that is brought by another fellow human, or by just nature and in itself, or even God. Like when you watch the Bible, there are like I would say, like natural disasters or calamities that would happen, and destroy completely the life of human beings. So I guess those are concepts that we know about from the stories and the lore and like the mythology, but that we also, like, all of us experimented those dynamics. We all of us experimented what we would call injustice. A lot of us have experimented very heinous or very unexplicable, like unexplainable acts that we kind of like suffered from. All of us probably had moments where we did something we knew was bad at the moment, or we learned was bad afterwards. Some people may have experimented like repentance, so some people may have experimented regrets, grief, pain, suffering, and I guess this is an aspect of human life that is very well ingrained in ourselves. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we cause harm to ourselves and others. And I guess sometimes when we experiment such harm, it can be that intense that we want to never think again about this. It really like shoves down a complete aspect of our personality in some unconscious realm, while we just go on with life. So I've seen in my practice, and I guess it's also my personal experiment, that whenever people just live that strong of an experience, it kind of reflects itself in a lot of spheres of the human psyche. We can see it in fantasies, we can see it in phobias, we can see it in fears, we can see it in how we relate with each other, we can see it in dreams, we can see it in, I guess a whole lot different aspect of our psyches. Like the books we can read, the stories we hear about, the movies we are attracted to, and it has a sense of us to confront ourselves to those realities, in my opinion. Because if we stay in a state of wherever the trauma is completely occulted an aspect of our personality or possibilities of behaviors, we represent a lack or an excess, probably both at the same time, in our way of behaving. So that leads me to the second concept. I think since we because of the trauma, experiment this occultation, and so we are experimented the lack or the excess we will that will be complementary to what is lacking or in excess in others. And I think that's what leads me to this other concept that we experiment trauma, and this trauma we will make it ourselves and part of our identity more or less consciously, and experiment what I call perpetuation or alignment to the trauma. So it's about us finding back in some relationships um, the condition to re-experiment the trauma, either being the perpetuator this time or being the victim back, and all of this to serve some kind of impression of identity. You might have had the impression before in your life to always be in kind of the same type of relationships or the same similar dynamics in your relationship, or be confronted to a person that is always saying, like, that is saying, yeah, I'm always confronted to the same kind of persons, those narcissists, blah blah, or I don't know, other kinds of ideas about the type of person they might be confronted to, or you might be confronted to. And I think it's kind of like serves a purpose, which is externalization of some aspects of the personality, because identifying to themselves, like to these aspects of personality, might make a person confront back to the traumatic experiment they try to avoid, or they are being in denial of, or maybe to the pain if they are like over identifying to the traumatic experiment. You might be in some way aligning to the traumatic behavior, like might be yourself in the executioner position, but at the same time like recreating the situation of you being a victim back, or you can be avoiding like being some kind of state of denial and unconsciously like putting it in a shadow aspect of your psyche, and also be in this like perpetuation of the behavior of the executioner, or being in the position of the victim. What's important is this idea of the conscious or unconscious externalization of some aspect of the personality, whether it might be like what we would consider as being a quality or a default in people, in ourselves. Like we might be seeing like violence as being like the way to recall the trauma, or hate or sadness or many things might be the trigger, and so we are kind of either over identifying to this, we find it in others and we are like, oh, this person is this or that, and this is evil, or this is if it's a positive externalization, whatever, oh, this is wonderful. Or in other people, whether for it to be unconscious, they will be like, oh, um, again, this person is this or that, it's evil or it's wonderful. And I guess that's all about like this aspect of the self that is like externalized and projected upon others. And so we kind of enter into another step in the path, which is like how judgments and being judgmental upon others might be a cue for what has been externalized by the trauma and the traumatic experiment. And I guess I will maybe give an example, but maybe someone that has like experimented violence as a child. I guess there are, for example, for some men that I followed as a doctor that experimented violence as a child, they would like experiment the behavior as victim and as executioner while they are like being teenagers. And then early adulthood, maybe finding some of the position as being more in line with their morality scale, what they think about morality. And so maybe one of the aspects, the aspect of the executioner or the aspect of the victim, might be like externalized from the conscious realm, and see in a bad light, seen as something that is like either the executioner is externalized and they're like, yeah, men are monsters, they do a lot of like horrible things, they are violent, blah blah blah. And others might see like identifying with the executioner, might externalize the victim and be like, oh yeah, those blah blah, those person that are just like passive in their life, they blah blah, you know. And I guess that's the important thing, is we really ought to pay attention to what we judge upon others, because usually judgment is merely a reflect of what we are unconscious of in ourselves. Because I really think that there are like virtuous or vicious ways of in each emotions and behavior of humanity we can find a route to act on integrity and responsibility with the collective. Because I guess what serves us as being in this judgmental position is that we are in self-idealization. We are in a realm where we don't want to confront ourselves with our fears or shadows, like what is like again in our unconscious realm, and that is like very very much in present in a way of relating with others. I've seen a lot of people being in, for example, a strong criticism against patriarchy, or against capitalism, or against, and in a way having a lot of unconscious aspects of their personality that were kind of like dominant or violent in this like judgmental lens. Like they would feel themselves as being the victims of capitalism or patriarchy, and because of that they would feel righteous into creating like spaces wherever they could exert the same kind of behavior toward what they would consider as being their executioners, only because of superficial aspects of the people. I don't know. We see a lot of things about like, for example, for a lot of people, like the sociological lens would be a mere reason unleash some level of retribution, you know, just saying, yeah, you're a male, or you're white, or you're blah blah, or you're blah blah, and it can be another sense, like it can be you're a woman, you're uh, uh, I guess you come from this country, or blah blah. So having all these kind of like stereotypes about someone, about just one category of sociological category they might identify with or not, because in the end that is their choice, and yeah, just being judgmental and violent in such lens, and stripping people from their, like, the complete individuality of their personal journey of experiment. Like, each person in their life, they experimented a lot of different things that we are not aware of, and that might be completely impossible to guess if we just look at the person and those statistical way of categorize people, because in the end it serves this narrative that we are the good person, we are the person that is righteous, we are the blah blah, and when we fall in those mechanisms that are, in my opinion, mechanisms of unawareness, we are exiting the possibility of really connecting with others on, like, the precise nature of the link that we could have with them outside of these superficial lenses. So in my opinion, it's very important to just be aware of ourselves and what we might have suffered from an individual or a situation or blah blah blah, and in some way get enough consciousness, even enough healing in our journey. And that's a path, I guess. We have to cross some moments wherever we are in this judgmental scale. I've been in this, I've been in those steps, but I guess the path into healing is to be more conscious, is to be accepting that we lived what we lived, and this is a part of us, and it surely also exists in others, but it exists in ourselves also. So I guess that's what I wanted to say about this morality code, because again, a lot of suffering, and I think we can very much get out of this if we find love in ourselves, and we find enough love to just, yeah, see that maybe if we are just crippled down in this victim position is something that we that is like just limiting ourselves, and we have like a way of stepping out this position in a very possibly magnificent way, and find really ourselves in those painful experiments. Also, for the people that might, like, spend their life into the executioner position, and I guess doing heinous acts upon others that are more of the representation of their maybe own innocence, or maybe their own helplessness. This is a way out, and I think it's important to say it, because identifying ourselves with evil is like stripping ourselves from our divinity and our and all the love that we may also express in ourselves. And I think it is important to be connected to, like, to our emotions in a whole. Like, I think for me, being in love is also being able to connect to, for example, the anger that we might feel, and convert this anger to more like sacred rage, like be present in a confrontational space, or in setting boundaries, or not just being like apologizing everything, but being present and see the acts for what they are. But I guess to really break the circle of hate, we have to step in love at some point, in love of ourselves and our shadow. Whenever we acknowledge them in ourselves, we will acknowledge and understand them in others. And we might be more easily able to understand where those behaviors come from and what purpose they are serving for certain type of identities. So this is my pick on all of these subjects. This is a way for me to say that I really don't think that inherently evil people exist. For me, this is about circle of hate and reproduction of trauma into type of postures that are like, yeah, serving a purpose in defending people against their own traumas and shadows and what they don't want to see in themselves. I guess I also want to speak about like but I will speak in another audio or video about that, about the divine and how wholeness and the divine, and maybe what behavioral mechanism we can like see in people that are like trying to find desperately their way to their wholeness and the divinity and humanity in ourselves. But it will be the subject of another audio or video, I can feel it. So yeah, I will conclude it there. May peace and relief find us all in our way, I would say. Sending you a lot of love, and see you another time.